I don't know if other men feel this way, but the day your daughter is born, it changes something deep inside you, almost like a door you didn't know existed is suddenly flung open, and behind it is a kind of love that's loud, protective, raw. When Emily came into this world 16 years ago, all 6 pounds and 9 ounces of her, I stood there in that sterile hospital room with my knees shaking like a kid on his first bike, staring down at this tiny bundle of pink and wondering how someone so small could suddenly become the axis my whole world spun around. I've built bridges, towers, even a few homes with my hands over the last 2 decades, but nothing I've ever made in concrete or steel has come close to the pride I felt raising her. And so, when her sweet 16 started creeping up on the calendar, I knew I wasn't going to let it be one of those backyard barbecue affairs with balloons and a sheet cake. I was going to give her something that would feel like magic, the kind of moment she'd remember when she was older and maybe struggling herself, something to remind her that no matter what, her old man had loved her like hell. I spent 6 months working weekends just to put aside enough cash to restore a 2012 Mustang, cherry red, leather interior, rebuilt the engine myself and cleaned every inch of that car like I was polishing a memory. But that wasn't even the best part. I'd hired a local guy who did film editing on the side to cut together a tribute video. Not just photos, but old home videos, Emily's first swim, her 5th birthday when her cake fell over and she laughed anyway, the day I taught her how to ride a bike, and the last shot, something I thought would mean the world to her, a video from her mom, Dana, who I asked to record a message from our bedroom. I imagined Emily watching that on the projector screen in front of all her friends, blushing at the baby photos, maybe even tearing up at the end, knowing her parents loved her enough to celebrate her like this. I didn't know it at the time, but that video, the thing meant to make her birthday unforgettable, would end up burning a hole through the center of everything I thought I knew about my family. Looking back now, I can still feel the air in that banquet hall, the hum of the lights overhead, the smell of vanilla cake and too much perfume, the sound of chairs scraping on tile as people turned to watch the screen. I was standing near the back, drink in hand, the proud dad watching it all unfold, smiling like a fool. And if I'd known that in less than 2 minutes, that smile would die on my face, that what I'd see on that screen would take a machete to my marriage, to my home, to my own sense of self, I think I would have ripped the cord out of the wall right then and there. But I didn't. I stood there. I watched. And in doing so, I opened the door to a truth so ugly, so gut-wrenchingly cruel, that it would change not just Emily's sweet 16. But every single day that followed. I remember standing at the edge of the ballroom, one hand resting on the back of a chair, the other nervously swirling a glass of ginger ale that had long since gone warm, watching Emily glide through the crowd like the young woman I'd raised her to be, poised, kind, radiant. She wore a light blue dress that I'd half-joked made her look like a Disney princess, though even then, I could see the first hints of something else beneath that, confidence, maybe, or strength. Everything was perfect in that moment, down to the string lights dangling above the dance floor and the gold-accented decorations Dana insisted on renting from a boutique place in town that charged like they catered royal weddings. I'd poured months into that night, into making sure that for once, after years of grinding overtime and duct-taping our lives together between bills and grown-up obligations, my daughter got the spotlight. Then the lights dimmed, the music faded, and the projector screen descended from the ceiling in slow silence like the curtain to a stage I hadn't realized would become the scene of my own humiliation. The first few clips rolled exactly as planned, baby Emily in a pumpkin costume, Emily's first dance recital with her shoelace untied, that ridiculous camping trip where she caught a fish half her size and demanded we release it because he looked scared. The laughter rolled through the room like waves, parents smiling, kids giggling, waiters pausing in the corners to watch. I leaned into the moment like a man soaking up his final breath before drowning. Then came Dana's message. Only it wasn't Dana reading a letter into the camera, or even speaking to Emily. No. At first, it was just her face, natural, relaxed, not done up like I'd expected. She was in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of our bed, and then, she laughed. But not the way she usually laughs at something Emily says. This was different, intimate, flirtatious. A man's voice responded, low and smug, cutting through the air like a slow-moving blade. You should wear that dress for me again, he said, and Dana, my wife of 19 years, tilted her head and said, "You like that one, huh? Maybe next weekend." The silence in that room could have shattered glass. Chairs creaked as people leaned forward, unsure whether to believe what they were hearing. A few kids chuckled awkwardly, assuming it was some joke or a skit, but the adults knew. I knew. The rawness of her voice, the tone, the look in her eyes, none of it was staged. I felt something primal erupt in my chest, like someone had plunged their hand in and pulled out my heart while smiling through the act. My daughter, still seated near the front, turned her head slowly, her body frozen, eyes wide and locked on the screen as the video cut to black. She looked back at me then, her father, and the expression on her face wasn't just shock, or confusion, or embarrassment. It was pain. And in that single, shattering moment, I understood that this night, meant to be a celebration of her life, would instead become the beginning of the end of everything we'd ever known as a family. There are moments in a man's life when time doesn't just slow, it folds in on itself, like the second hand of the clock starts stuttering, unsure if it should keep moving forward or rewind to undo the damage it just witnessed. That's how it felt when that screen went black, the room still held in breathless, stunned silence, as if even the air itself was trying to process what it had seen. Dana, my wife, my partner, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was caught in a moment that wasn't meant for any of us, especially not for our daughter, and yet there it was, projected across a 10-foot screen, her betrayal blown up in high definition like a war crime. A few awkward coughs followed. Someone dropped a fork. And Emily, my baby girl, bolted from her seat like a startled deer, pushing through the guests, dress trailing behind her like a torn flag as she ran out the side door of the banquet hall, the sound of her heels echoing against tile louder than the music ever was. I didn't chase after her, not yet, because I knew if I moved, if I said a single word, I might explode in a way I couldn't undo. Instead, I turned slowly, like a man underwater, toward the woman responsible for detonating a landmine in the middle of our daughter's most sacred day. Dana was still seated at the front table, wine glass trembling between her fingers, cheeks drained of color, her lips parted but useless. Our eyes met, and in hers, I didn't see shame, not right away. I saw calculation, the frantic gears of a liar's brain trying to spin a new story, a deflection, some pathetic excuse she could spit out to take the edge off what everyone had just seen. But there was no lifeboat coming. Not this time. Not after that. She rose slowly, muttered something under her breath I didn't care to hear, and began weaving through the crowd toward me, as if we were going to talk this through like a couple caught in a petty argument and not like a husband and wife standing in the rubble of a blown-up family. I walked right past her, didn't say a word, didn't even break stride. My only thought was Emily. She mattered more than the venom simmering in my chest, more than the whispers starting to fill the room like wildfire, more than the urge to grab Dana by the wrist and ask her why she had done this to us, why she hadn't just left if she was so damn unhappy, why she had to turn our daughter's 16th birthday into a funeral for the life we thought we had. I found Emily behind the building, her makeup smeared, her breath hitched in sobs, and as I wrapped my arms around her, she looked up at me through broken tears and whispered the words that hit harder than anything Dana had said, "Was it all fake, Dad? Our family, was it ever real?" And in that moment, something inside me cracked wide open, because I honestly didn't know how to answer. By the time we pulled back into the driveway that night, the silence between us was so thick it felt like a living thing, crawling into every corner of the car, clawing at what was left of our family's spirit. Emily hadn't said much after she stopped crying, just wiped her face, took my hand, and asked if we could go home, and that word home, God, it hit me like a brick to the ribs. Because how the hell do you go home when the foundation's already been rotted from the inside out? I let her take the shower first, and while the water ran upstairs, I sat at the kitchen table, lights off, glass of bourbon untouched in front of me, just staring at the wood grain beneath my fingers like it could offer some sort of answer or escape. Then I heard the front door open behind me. I didn't turn. I didn't say a word. I just waited. Dana stepped into the kitchen like a stranger, heels off, makeup streaked, dress wrinkled and hanging off one shoulder like she'd aged 10 years in a night. She hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to speak or sit or slink off into the shadows like the ghost she'd just become in my life. When she finally did speak, her voice was thin, almost rehearsed, as if she'd spent the entire car ride home trying to build a sentence strong enough to explain why our daughter had to watch her mother get caught cheating in front of her classmates, her teachers, and God knows how many extended family members. "I didn't mean for it to come out like that," she said, as if the betrayal itself would have been fine if it hadn't been revealed with such poor timing. I finally looked at her then, and I swear, I saw not guilt, but fear that her comfortable, curated life was about to crack apart under the weight of her own actions. "You had a choice," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, the kind that vibrates just beneath the skin. "You had every chance to leave if you were that unhappy. But you stayed. You slept next to me. You kissed me goodnight. You planned our daughter's birthday party knowing damn well you were living a second life behind our backs." She started to cry, and I could tell they were real tears, but it didn't matter, not anymore, because what she broke wasn't just my trust or even our marriage. She had shattered the image our daughter had of her own mother. And as I watched her sob silently in the kitchen we once danced in after putting Emily to bed, I knew without question that I would never forgive her. Not for this. Not ever. I wish I could say that after that night, I fell apart, curled up in some sob story cliché, wept on the bathroom floor, shattered a few dishes, maybe even slept in my truck out of poetic spite, but the truth was uglier than that, colder. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw her clothes out the window or take a baseball bat to the framed wedding photo in the hallway. What I did was sit in the dark, long after Dana had slinked upstairs like a scolded child, long after Emily's bedroom door had clicked shut with the weight of unbearable silence behind it, and I just listened. I listened to the sound of nothing. No apologies. No footsteps rushing back down to try again. No real remorse. And in that silence, something in me calcified. It was like the warmth drained from my blood and left behind steel. That's the thing nobody tells you about betrayal, it doesn't always break you. Sometimes, it sharpens you into something terrifying. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise, my body moving on instinct, like muscle memory had taken the wheel. I brewed coffee without tasting it, stared out the window as the fog rolled over the yard, and plotted, not revenge, not yet, but clarity. I needed the full picture. How long had it been going on? Who was this man? Had he been in my house? Had he sat at my table? Had I shaken his damn hand at one of Dana's corporate mixers while he was secretly whispering filth into my wife's ear after hours? The questions swarmed like wasps in my skull, and I knew I wouldn't sleep again until I had answers. So I did what any man would do when he realizes his marriage was just a polished lie. I started digging. I waited until Dana left for work, pretending we were in a Cold War ceasefire, and I tore through her home office, her laptop, her phone backups, old emails she thought had been deleted but were just buried. What I found didn't just confirm the affair, it dragged it out into the harsh light, naked and ugly, and worse than I ever could have imagined. There were text messages that dated back nearly a year, almost 12 months of carefully choreographed lies. Hotel confirmations under fake names. Explicit messages exchanged on a burner email account she'd used to set up work trips that, according to her calendar, were conferences in Denver, Chicago, even once right here in town while I'd taken Emily to her volleyball tournament. I even found a photo, taken in our backyard, of all places, her sitting on the patio with a man whose face was half turned from the camera, but the tattoos on his arm were crystal clear. I zoomed in until my eyes blurred, and in that moment, the face wasn't the thing that haunted me most. It was the way she was looking at him, laughing, playful, head tilted back like a woman unburdened, like a woman in love. And I realized, that smile hadn't been meant for me in a very long time. The weeks that followed moved like a bad dream wrapped in routine, one of those surreal nightmares where everything looks normal on the surface, but if you scratch just beneath the paint, all you find is rot. Dana and I coexisted in that house like ghosts, sharing coffee in silence, passing each other in the hallway with tight smiles and dead eyes, pretending for Emily's sake that we were still a family when the truth was already ash in our mouths. I watched her try to recover, try to act like she hadn't burned the bridge between us to the ground in front of half the town. She cleaned more. Cooked meals she hadn't touched in years. Left her phone face up for once, a pathetic gesture of transparency that only made her look guiltier. But I saw right through it. I saw the way her fingers twitched when a message came through. I saw the hesitation in her eyes every time she looked at me, not like a woman who wanted forgiveness, but like one terrified of what her husband might do next now that the mask was off. And truthfully, she should have been scared, because while she was busy sweeping up the broken glass of her image, I was building something far more dangerous, a plan. Quiet. Meticulous. Ruthless. I contacted a lawyer. A real shark. A woman who'd built her entire career dismantling men and women just like Dana, serial liars, manipulators, narcissists who thought they were too smart to ever get caught. I gave her everything, every text, every photo, every receipt, every time-stamped scrap of infidelity I'd dug up. And when she looked up at me from the folder and asked, "How far do you want to go?" I answered without blinking, "All the way." Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about survival, mine and Emily's. About stripping away the comfortable lie Dana had wrapped herself in for years and making sure she never had the chance to weaponize that lie against me again. And if she wanted to fight for the house, for the accounts, for custody, she'd be walking into a war I'd already won before she even picked up the sword. Still, I kept it cool. I let her think I was processing. Healing. I let her believe the space I gave her was a chance at redemption, when really, it was just distance, room to maneuver while I tightened the noose behind the scenes. The final straw came 2 weeks later when Emily came home early from school, visibly upset, and told me she'd overheard 2 kids whispering about the birthday video, mocking her mom, calling her the cheater from the party. I saw it then, the damage wasn't just to me. Dana had humiliated our daughter, stained her name with scandal, and for what? A cheap thrill with a man who vanished the second the spotlight hit. That was the moment I knew, deep in my bones, there was no redemption arc for this woman. No reconciliation. No slow rebuild. There was only one path forward, and it was one I was prepared to walk alone, dragging her betrayal behind me like a chain until it snapped. I served Dana the divorce papers on a Thursday afternoon, strategically timed between her client meetings, just early enough in the day that she'd have to face the rest of her coworkers with red eyes and a fake smile. I didn't hand them to her myself, of course. I had them delivered to her office, just like my lawyer advised, right in front of her assistant and 2 interns who worshipped her like some kind of corporate queen. And when she called me that night, voice shaking with a mixture of rage and desperation, I didn't yell or curse or even speak above a whisper. I let her unravel. I let her ask why I'd do something so aggressive, as if the public exposure of her own affair at our daughter's birthday party wasn't the equivalent of emotional napalm. I let her accuse me of trying to ruin her life, of blindsiding her. And I sat there on the porch, the wind rustling through the trees, and said 4 words I knew she wasn't ready to hear: "I already have, Dana." The process moved fast, faster than she ever expected. She thought she'd stall, play the victim, turn on the tears in mediation and use every dirty trick in the playbook to come out clean on the other side. But what she didn't know, what she never saw coming, was that I'd been preparing for this moment like a general before war. My lawyer had everything: paper trails, screenshots, call logs, bank statements showing she'd used Emily's college fund to book hotel rooms and luxury dinners for her little trysts while I worked overtime and packed school lunches. She'd built her house of cards in my blind spot, but I'd spent weeks stacking up evidence like dynamite, and once the legal proceedings started, every lie she thought was buried came exploding out of the ground like a damn minefield. Custody. Mine, full. House. Mine. Retirement fund. Split down the middle, with my share protected. Dana got the shell of her old life, the whispers from co-workers, and a one-bedroom apartment she could barely afford on her now shrinking salary, thanks to the ethics investigation that followed after someone, not me, of course, anonymously submitted my documentation to her firm's HR. But the real victory, the part I'll carry with me to my grave, was Emily. She chose me. Without hesitation. Without conditions. She told the court she wanted to live with her father, that she didn't feel safe around her mother emotionally, that she didn't trust someone who could lie to the people who loved her the most. And when Dana heard that from the judge's bench, something in her face broke, something brittle and irreparable. It was like watching a mask shatter in slow motion, revealing the hollow, desperate woman beneath. And in that moment, I felt nothing, no pity, no rage, no regret. Only peace. Because I hadn't just survived the betrayal, I had dismantled it piece by piece, until she stood alone in the ruins of the life she threw away for a man who wouldn't even return her calls after the fallout. In the weeks that followed the court ruling, I began to notice something peculiar happening, not within myself, but in the world around me, like the universe was finally shifting its weight in my favor after years of quietly watching me suffer. Dana had moved out by then, her designer wardrobe crammed into plastic storage bins, her car weighed down with more than just belongings. It carried the weight of shame, of consequences, of a woman who had gambled everything and lost spectacularly. And though I never once raised my voice or uttered a single cruel word to her during those final interactions, the look in her eyes said it all. She wasn't afraid of me, she was afraid of herself. Afraid of the wreckage she'd created, and the sudden, horrifying realization that the man she betrayed wasn't the fool she believed, but the executioner she never saw coming. Word of what happened spread fast. I didn't have to tell anyone, people love a scandal more than they love the truth, and in our suburban bubble, this one exploded like a grenade in a swimming pool. Dana's reputation crumbled in slow motion, and not just because of the affair. Once the story of the birthday party video leaked, and it did leak, as all things do, the public opinion turned merciless. Her co-workers stopped defending her. Friends she'd clung to began pulling away, choosing silence over solidarity. Even her own sister stopped coming around. And the man she'd risked everything for. The one who whispered sweet filth into her ear while I tucked our daughter into bed. He vanished. Deleted his socials. Transferred to another office. Left her holding the bomb after it detonated. Some poetic justice writes itself, no matter how patient you have to be to see it bloom. But the sweetest moment, the one that wrapped around my chest like a warm, quiet kind of vengeance, came during a school fundraiser 3 months later. Emily was volunteering, cheerful again, laughter returning to her face like sunlight cracking through winter clouds. Dana showed up late, alone, dressed in her carefully curated, "I'm doing great" outfit, pretending to browse bake sale tables while people whispered behind styrofoam coffee cups. She tried to approach Emily, reached out a hand, but my daughter stepped back without hesitation. And in a voice that was calm, strong, and unmistakably mine, she said, "You've done enough, Mom." That was the moment Dana finally understood what I had known since the night of the party: some things you don't come back from. Some choices cost more than anyone can afford. And some losses? You live with them forever. There's something eerie about reclaiming a space that once held so many ghosts, walking into the living room after work and realizing, for the first time in years, that the silence isn't tense or bitter or cold, it's peaceful. The house, once thick with resentment disguised as routine, had transformed. Not overnight, no. It happened gradually, like smoke clearing after a fire. The scent of betrayal still clung to the walls in certain places, Dana's perfume buried in the couch cushions, her handwriting on old calendar notes stuck to the fridge, but the energy had shifted. And the moment I knew I'd truly won wasn't in the courtroom, or even when Emily stood her ground at that fundraiser. It was a random Tuesday night, Emily upstairs finishing homework, and I stood in the kitchen stirring spaghetti sauce, humming to some old Stones song playing from my phone, and I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not even a little. And that terrified me, because peace, after surviving a war, can feel like guilt. Dana, on the other hand, didn't find peace. I didn't need to spy or stalk or hear it through the grapevine, her decline was public. She tried to reinvent herself, started posting those forced, filtered selfies with hashtags like hashtag starting fresh and hashtag stronger than ever, but the truth bled through every pixel. Her eyes didn't smile anymore. People stopped liking her posts. Mutual friends unfollowed in quiet batches. I heard from a neighbor that her rebound affair, the guy from her office, the one she gave up our family for, had a fiancé in another city. That little twist of irony might have made me smirk, if I still cared. But what really stuck with me was what I found in my mailbox one rainy afternoon, a card. No return address. Just my name, written in handwriting I hadn't seen in months. Inside, a simple note in Dana's handwriting, "I miss our life." I didn't realize how much until I lost it. There was no apology. No ownership. Just regret, raw, hollow, and far too late. I didn't write her back. I didn't call. I didn't even mention it to Emily. That silence, that was my revenge. Because for a woman like Dana, who thrived on control, who manipulated moments like a puppeteer with strings made of guilt and charm, there was no greater punishment than being ignored. She'd wanted chaos, so I gave her stillness. She'd wanted fire, so I gave her cold. She'd shattered our world thinking she could rebuild it with someone else's hands, and now she stood alone, staring through the glass at the life she once had, while I stood inside it, whole, unburned, and finally, free. 2 years later, I stood in the same banquet hall where it all fell apart, only this time, the air wasn't heavy with suspicion or shame, it pulsed with pride, with laughter, with something that almost felt sacred. Emily's high school graduation party had drawn a crowd, not just of classmates and neighbors, but of people who had watched us survive the kind of storm that splits families in half and leaves nothing but debris. And yet there we were, whole. She wore her cap and gown like armor, cheeks flushed with happiness as she posed for photos beside the woman I was now dating, someone who had never once asked me to forget the past but instead sat with me in it, helped me bury it. As the music swelled and camera flashes lit up the room like fireflies, I couldn't help but glance toward the back, half expecting a shadow from another life to sneak in and poison the joy. But Dana didn't show. Of course she didn't. And even if she had, it wouldn't have mattered. Her chapter had ended the day I closed that door behind her. I think a lot of men who've been betrayed believe they'll never laugh again, that the weight of infidelity chains itself to your ribs and drags behind you like a phantom you can't shake. And for a while, I believed that too. I believed the pain would shape the rest of my life, that I'd spend my remaining years picking through the ruins of what she destroyed, too bitter to rebuild. But then I remembered who I was before Dana. Before the lie. I remembered the man who worked triple overtime to buy his daughter her first car, the man who cried alone in a parked truck rather than scream in the face of betrayal, the man who didn't just survive, he adapted. I took the ashes of our marriage and used them as soil. I grew something better. And when Emily hugged me that night and whispered, "We made it, Dad," I didn't cry because of sadness. I cried because I knew she wasn't just talking about the party. She was talking about us. We had made it through hell, and we were still standing. So if you're listening to this, maybe sitting alone in your car wondering if the pain will ever stop, if the silence in your house will ever feel like peace instead of punishment, let me tell you something no one told me: you won't just heal, you'll rise. And the people who thought they could destroy you, one day, they'll watch from the outside as you rebuild the life they never believed you could live without them. And that silence they left you with? You'll learn to love it. You'll fill it with laughter, music, and memories they'll never be part of. Because when someone chooses to burn down their own home, you don't chase them into the fire. You let them burn. And then, you rebuild. Stronger. Smarter. Free.